Very important product, and obviously who they are, what the product is. But it was something really high stakes, so time and money and effort had been put into making sure it was a success. And my friend was helping with the research. Now we're getting near to the end of the project, and he runs a focus group. And it's a focus group of which some of the top brass are going to be observing, so a little bit higher stakes than usual. But this is what he does. He recruits the right people, he plans a good session, and over the course of a couple of hours, he explores questions like, do you have a problem that this product can help you solve? Do you want this product? Would you buy this product? And how much would you buy it for? And it's going brilliantly. Everyone in the room really feels that the product solves a problem that they have, and everyone really wants the product, and everybody would definitely buy the product. And for a price not far off what the company wanted to charge. I think you might be able to see where this one's going. It was going brilliantly until the last few minutes. And at the end, my friend says to everybody who's there to say thank you for your time, your participation. You can take away a £30 voucher, or you can have one of the new products to take home with you today. My friend had been careful to bring enough products. Obviously, it was going to go this well. And obviously everyone wants one. They've said they want one. They said they'd buy it, and they'd buy it for much more than £30. But as every person gets up and leaves, every single one of them goes for £30. Sometimes research does not get us to the truth. And sometimes that's because people don't make any sense. Or to use the technical term, people are irrational. Now that's definitely something you would have seen in your day-to-day life. But you also probably seen the whole slew of books and talks and articles talking about human irrationality and irrational behaviour. In fact, this morning, our first talk, we saw Thinking Fast and Slow and Predictably Irrational, both of which are fantastic books I recommend reading that cover this area. But something that tends not to come up in those books that I hear a lot when I talk to people who work in technology about irrational behaviour is this little assumption that we're all happy to accept that other people are irrational. We're all happy to accept that our users are irrational. And normal people are irrational, and mainstream people are irrational, and they're irrational, definitely. But we're not irrational. We're far too smart to be irrational. And so, let me give you a different example of irrational behaviour. This is how The Economist used to do their subscriptions. You could get a year's worth of access to their paywalled website for $59. You could get a year's worth of weekly print editions for $125. Or you could get the print editions and the website for $125. Yeah, the prices are probably a bit out of date, but it's obvious which is the best deal, right? And that's the one that most Economist subscribers went for. Pretty much everyone wants the combined subscription. Some people only want web, and no one wants the print one, of course. This subscription model caught the eye of Dan Ariely, who's the author of Predictably Irrational, and has done some of the most interesting work in this area. And he put it in front of 100 MIT students and got them to choose between the three options. And again, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. Most people went for the join, some people wanted web only, no one wanted print only. So Ariely ran it again, except this time he got rid of the one I wanted. Got another group of students, showed them this offer, and this time round, it went differently. To be clear, Ariely took away an option that nobody wanted and changed the way people chose between the two remaining options. That blows my mind every time. So, MIT students are irrational. The readers of The Economist are irrational. Smart people are irrational. We are all irrational. And just as the final kicker, even if you know that you behave irrationally, or your brain has tendencies in that direction, that's still not enough to stop you behaving irrationally. Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, has been studying this area for like 20 years. The guy won a Nobel Prize, and yet he still thinks he falls victim to just as much irrational behaviour as the rest of us. So, what Ariely and what Daniel Kahneman and what the other psychologists working in this area have learned is we have something like bugs in the software our brain runs, and they're called cognitive biases. And the Wikipedia page has more than 150 of them listed. But the good news is you know some of these already. So you know the herd effect, our tendency to want to do what other people do. You know the paradox of choice, in which giving people more options actually makes it harder for them to decide, and it makes them less happy with their decision in the long term. And then there's the Dunning-Kruger effect. Has everyone heard of this one? This is my favourite. If you ask a novice in a particular area of skill and an expert to rate their personal abilities, the novice will rate their abilities higher than the expert will rate theirs. You can usually find someone who's falling for Dunning-Kruger in your office if you look hard. Now, a lot of work's been done about how you can design products for irrational users, or usually how you can design products to take advantage of users' irrationality. But today I'm going to talk about research, because if our users are irrational, and they are, how can we trust anything they say or do in a research setting? Now that used to be a question that really worried me. I've worked in tech and product, UX and research roles for about 7 years. And about 3 years ago, when I started reading books about behavioural economics, about human irrationality, I was as excited as I was terrified, because what I was reading undermined all the research I'd done until that date. And since then, I have done a lot more reading, a lot more trial, and a lot more error to come up with a list of tactics that have helped me do research with irrational users and get to the truth regardless. So today I'm going to share some of those with you, as well as talking about some of the cognitive biases that seem to come into play most often in the research environment. In particular, I am going to talk about why your users can't predict the future, and why they can't necessarily remember the past accurately, and why you shouldn't necessarily trust everything they tell you in the present. So, don't trust them at all, as well. Start with the future. So, no one can predict the future. This is not controversial. Even futurists usually struggle with this. If you've ever looked back at previous predictions, it's pretty easy to see. But people are also really bad at predicting their own personal future, even when it's just a couple of days away, even when it's just their own behaviour, even when it's something trivial. People really, really struggle to make predictions that actually come true. And for the reasons behind this, let's look at Daniel Kahneman again. Kahneman explains that there are two different modes your mind can operate in: thinking fast, thinking slow, or, as he particularly unimaginatively and unhelpfully named them, System 1 and System 2. This is here partly to make the distinction clear to you, but partly so I don't mix them up when I'm talking about them. Call me out if you hear it, but let's see how that goes. System 1 is sometimes called your monkey brain. It is fast and intuitive and runs on gut feel and instinct. And it's lazy. It doesn't want to put the effort into thinking through everything very carefully. It just goes for the first option that looks good. And System 2 is the opposite. System 2 is methodical and logical and deliberative, and it wants nothing more than to think through all of the options extremely carefully so it can be sure that it's made the right decision. That makes it a very resource-intensive system for our bodies to run. System 1 is all about running on automatic and being in the moment, whereas System 2 is about planning, and every time you're focusing or really thinking about something, you're using System 2. Now, another really common misconception that people have is that we're using System 2 most of the time. We're not. We're using System 1. Every time you're doing something you're not really concentrating on, you're probably using System 1. When you get into the shower in the morning, when you decide what you want for lunch, most of the time you don't even switch System 2 on. So, System 1 doing most of what we do for us. In fact, we've even delegated to System 1 some stuff that should really be handled by System 2. And as an example, this question. Let's just give this one a roll. Jack is married, George is unmarried. Jack is looking at Anne is looking at George. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? And your answers are yes, no, or can't be determined.
C.
Got an answer?
C.
Okay, most people say C. And it makes sense, right? It's very hard to see how you can be sure of either A or B. But if you stop, you think it through, you can be sure. Anne is either married or she's unmarried. If Anne is unmarried, Jack, who is married, is looking at her. If Anne is married, on the other hand, she's looking at George, who's unmarried. Everybody says C, but it's actually A. And the reason why we say C is because this is something that we let System 1 handle. We don't engage System 2. We just let System 1 pick the first answer, and System 1 is lazy, so it really picks the answer which is, I don't really want to think about this. There's some really interesting variations of this, actually. My favourite is if you make the question harder to read, like literally physically harder to read, more people get it right. And the theory is that when it's harder to read the question, more people switch over to System 2. And so they're more prone to actually think it through and actually get it right. Now, what's the implication here for research? Well, remember when I said System 2 does most of our prediction of the future, most of our conscious thinking things through? When we talk to people in research, it's normally System 2 that we're talking to, which is a problem, because when we're asking about the future, it'll be System 1 who lives through that future moment by moment, most of the time. We're asking the wrong system. And because System 2 and System 1 are so different, it is really very hard for System 2 to actually predict what System 1 is going to do. Even when we're just watching somebody use a website or an app, the fact that we're watching them, the fact that it's a research environment, makes people switch over to System 2 for something that they normally just use System 1 for. We end up talking and watching and observing and recording the wrong system. It's no wonder it can't actually predict the future. So, System 1 and System 2 is one way to divide your mental functioning into two different states. And there's another one which is called hot and cold states. So, a hot state is where you're feeling visceral arousal. You are angry or joyous or afraid, or you're in pain, or you're hungry, or you're thirsty. And a cold state is any time when you're not feeling those kind of powerful emotions or experiences. And they affect our choices and our rational behaviour so much more than we like to think. For this example, let's talk about judges. It's not very clear, but at the top it says the rate at which judges grant parole. This is a study done in Israel. So essentially, the higher lines are, the more prisoners are getting out on parole. And the axis along the bottom is time. We're looking at this averaged over the course of a typical working day. Now, they're a little bit faint, but can everyone see 3 peaks? Yeah? So the first one's the beginning of the day. Has anyone seen this study before? Does anyone know what the other 2 peaks are? Lunch. Yeah. It's a snack break mid-morning and it's lunch. What this means is that judges are much, much more likely to grant parole when they've eaten recently. The longer they go without having eaten, the less likely it is that the prisoners get out. And this isn't a small effect. We go from 65% of prisoners getting parole first thing in the morning when the judge is fresh and just had breakfast, to 0% just before their morning snack break. That is a staggering impact of just a hot or a cold state affecting the kind of judgment that we really expect to be super hyper-rational. Just like System 1 and System 2, hot states and cold states don't understand each other well, and they find it really, really hard to predict the behaviour of somebody in the opposite state. This, incidentally, is why we're told not to go to the supermarket when we're hungry, because our hungry cells cannot imagine never, ever feeling unhungry, and so we buy too much food. There's a technical term for this inability for the states to understand each other, is the empathy gap. Now, I'm working in product, talk a lot about empathy, but this is an empathy gap that exists within a person. It is the term for a person's inability to empathize with themselves in a different mental state. And again, this is something that can trip you up in research. I encountered the empathy gap recently in some research I was doing into banking app usability, of all things. I was doing two kinds of research as part of this study. I was watching people use their apps in front of me, and then I was running a large online survey after that. Now, security wasn't supposed to be the focus of either of those bits of research, but what quickly became apparent is that the login requirements of the apps were a major, major pain point. Anyone else find this to be the most annoying part of your banking app? Okay. HSBC?
Yeah.
Seriously, HSBC is the worst. So I asked those people, would you like your app to be a bit easier to use, even if that meant it was just slightly less secure? And pretty much everyone said yes, they very much like this. But when I asked a similar question in the survey, I got the opposite answer. Not only did some people say, actually, it's fine right now, some people even said they wanted more security, even if that made their app harder to use. And this is the difference between a hot and a cold state. The people who I spoke to while they were using their apps were in the moment, and in that moment they just failed to log in 4 times in a row, and they were unbelievably frustrated. And they were kind of embarrassed because you can't even log into your banking app in front of someone. And the people who answered the survey weren't in that moment, and they weren't using their app, and they weren't feeling frustrated at all. And they couldn't imagine what they would want when they were feeling frustrated. Just like the people who were in the moment feeling so frustrated couldn't imagine ever not feeling that way. And they couldn't hypothesize what the opposite state would want in the future. A hot state versus a cold state gave you diametrically opposite results in that research. And I still fundamentally don't know which way the design of banking app should optimize, for the hot states or the cold states. I'm going to skip a bit here just to make sure that we do finish on time. In summary, optimism. Sometimes we are optimistic about the future, and we are far, far more likely to expect good things to happen to us than bad things. So we minimize the chance of bad things happening, which means our predictions of the future are always rosier than reality. In summary, people find it hard to predict what they'll do in the future, or what they'll want, or how they'll feel, because you might be talking to the wrong mental state, whether that's a system 1, system 2 problem, or whether that's the difference between a hot and a cold mental state. So what do you do? So clearly, the best option is to do all of your research in the real situation in which your users are using whatever you've built. You research with them at home in the middle of the evening when they're trying to get their kids to bed and work out what to eat, and there's nothing in the fridge, and then they know that they need to go to the doctor's in the morning and there's an appointment. It's impossible most of the time. Or if not impossible, it's certainly not very practical to expect those people to also tell you what they think about whatever it is you're building in those states, in those situations. But what you can do is mimic those environments. So if somebody is going to be distracted when they use your app, distracted in research. If they're going to be in a rush, add time pressure to the situation. If they are going to be worried or afraid, start your session with a discussion of the things that make them worried or afraid. Again, careful on that one. We're shading close to some dodgy ethics there. You can also just ask them to imagine it. Get them to imagine it, get them to talk you through what it would be like, and you might end up with somebody who's slightly closer to the state they'll be in when they really use your product. The other great thing to do here is look at recorded behaviour rather than predicted behaviour. So this might be analytics or other sources of information. Instead of trying to guess what people will do in the future, see what they've already done in those situations, if you can. And finally, if the first two options are just unavailable to you, then just make sure you understand the environment your users will be in. Even if you can't test there, research that environment and overlay those results on what you see in the lab. So if somebody is carefully looking through the homepage and finding what they need after about 3 seconds in a lab, they're not going to do that in most real-world situations. You can get a sense of how impatient they'll be, how distracted they'll be, and then use that to interpret the results from the lab. So, people can't predict the future. they're actually also pretty bad at remembering the past. Just a heads up, this stuff is actually really scary. I was running through this talk with some friends earlier in the week just to make sure I got it all down. This bit gave them a bit of a kind of existential crisis. Yeah. Let's start by talking about what's really memorable. This is by the fantastic Caroline Jarrett, who does really good work on using surveys and how to use them well. And this is the approximate curve of forgetting. And it's telling us what we already know. Some events are just more memorable than others. Major life events are going to stay with you far longer than the day-to-day minutiae. Problem is that, at least most of the time in my research, I'm asking about day-to-day. I care about day-to-day. And that's the thing people just do not remember very well. And when people don't remember something, and they feel like it's something they should know, tend to make you arrogant. Like these folks.
Toby Morose from Cincinnati, Ohio.
I'm sure you're aware, President Obama very upset with Joe Biden. Should he have removed Biden from office after he made the now legendary "your mama" joke to Vladimir Putin?
No, I don't feel that I should.
Everybody's talking about it, everyone's seen them. What are your thoughts on President Barack Obama's new earrings?
I think they're pretty cool. He's going to look good. Hopefully he's not doing it for young boys, he's doing it for himself.
Where'd you see it?
Just on TV.
Let me ask you, what is your take on President Obama's decision to name Dennis Rodman ambassador to North Korea?
I don't think he has the experience for that position. I think the current ambassador is doing a great job. We have really excellent relations with North Korea right now. I can't say I was surprised, but I guess a little disappointed.
Where were you?
I was making some soup. Chowder.
As you must have seen, Hillary Clinton made a historic announcement from the San Andreas Fault that if elected, she will cancel all of the scheduled earthquakes for her term.
Well, I thought it was a good decision. I would support it.
Where were you when you saw that?
At home.
Who were you with?
I was just watching TV by myself.
Last time there was a scheduled earthquake, obviously the U.S. was warning everybody.
Yes, I remember that.
Where were you when you got your tweet?
I was in San Francisco. Obviously on my iPhone 6 Plus when I got the tweet. And you know what? And I was scared. So you know what? I'm done with the earthquake scene.
Roberta, did you watch the live stream of the first American landing on Pluto this morning?
Yeah.
Where were you?
I was shopping. I watched it on my phone.
Oh, cool. What did you think of it?
It was like really weird. I didn't expect it, so I was like.
Was it exciting or a little scary when he took off his helmet and did a little fake out and held his breath when he first landed?
I was scared for him, really. Like, I was just like, how is he doing that?
What do you think about Major Tom bringing his dog along for the ride, his trusty companion?
I think it's sweet, you know, because some companionship is always good, so I think it was really sweet.
Even though he had to ultimately slaughter and consume the dog.
Yeah, that's right.
As you know, this morning the first American landed on Pluto. What was going through your mind when you saw him plant the American flag on the
No, he didn't land on Pluto.
Why not?
So Pluto is over 1 billion miles away.
I don't know how many of those people actually really believe that they remembered getting a tweet to warn them about the schedule. Or whether they just didn't want to look stupid on television. If it's the latter, it is a little bit ironic. What is true though is that people do sometimes make up ghosts. That used to be quite controversial, but these days the jury is pretty much in. There's been a lot of work done on the exact circumstances and the reasons that people can invent a memory that they completely believe is true. Elizabeth Loftus has done some of the most interesting research in this area, including one study in which she gave participants 4 written descriptions of an event from their childhood. 3 of them are real, and one of them's a fake. But it's a fake that's been written with the help of the participants' relatives. So the story was every time about getting lost in a shopping mall. This was in America. And the story was seeded with their siblings' real names and their siblings' ages and the name of an area where they would conceivably have visited a mall. And 25% of the people who were given these 4 descriptions claimed to actually remember the shopping mall. And even worse, when Loftus told them that one of the stories was fake, 1 in 5 people picked out one of their real memories as being fake. The invented memory that had been given to them very, very recently was more real to them than their own memory. And this kind of stuff, this confabulation, as it's known, happens in the wild as well. Tammy Sharrott, another American researcher, did a study in which she compared the accounts of 9/11 given by people just after it with those same people's memories a year after. And while people claimed that they felt like their memories of this incredibly significant event were crystal clear, Sharrott found differences between the initial accounts and the memories a year later 63% of the time. And that's everything from tiny details to big, big differences. And it's not just Americans, despite my examples. In 1992, a Dutch cargo plane crashed into an apartment block in the Netherlands, and it was a very big story. 10 months later, psychologists asked people if they'd seen the airplane crash into the building on the TV news, and 55% of them said they did, which is interesting, because there were no news cameras recording the crash. What happened here is the researchers asked what is somewhat of a leading question, because it makes the assumption that the crash was recorded. And the respondents took that assumption and combined it maybe with their memory of seeing other crashes on TV, or their memory of the film of the aftermath of the crash, and makes an entirely new memory. And it's quite a detailed memory for some of these people. They could tell the researchers what angle the plane was flying at when it hit the building, whether it was on fire before the crash or only afterwards. I know we all know to avoid leading questions in using research, but I personally was kind of shocked by how far just one mildly leading question could take people into just invented responses. Unfortunately, this is not the only way in which our memories are unreliable. In the last 15 years, cognitive scientists have been doing a lot of really interesting work into how memory works in the brain. And what they've discovered casts doubt on even our strongest and most vivid memories, or particularly our strongest and most vivid memories. When you remember something, you retrieve the information from your brain. But what researchers have discovered is at the same time you are re-recording that information. So essentially every time you bring that particular set of circumstances to mind, you're swapping the original version with a copy. And for the memories that you come back to most often, you've done this again and again and again. And every time there's the opportunity for that new copy to veer just a little bit further away from the previous version, from the original version. It's essentially like we're playing a game of Chinese whispers with ourselves over the course of the years. Does anyone have stories in your family that get told like, over and over again through the years? Yeah? And family members often remember different details of those stories. And people who study my autobiographical memory have included this as an example of this phenomenon. My mother has a story that she loves to tell about my childhood, which I hate. And I hate it because it is extremely embarrassing, and I hate it because I remember that it happened to my brother. That thing, our strongest memories are the ones that we should trust least. Is that she writes for you guys? It's my tool, I'm right. The fact that our most cherished memories are least likely to be correct is the thing that gave my friend the existential crisis, that you all look insulated by lunch in a warm room. So, people cannot accurately remember the past. Some things just aren't memorable, and sometimes when people don't remember something, they'll make it up. And sometimes when they make it up, they won't realise that they've made it up. And then, our strongest memories are not necessarily our most reliable. Luckily, there are some things that you're probably already doing that help guard against this affecting your research. Avoiding leading questions. Obviously, we all know about that one. I certainly have been much more rigorous since I've heard about that Dutch confabulation study. Don't ask people about trivial stuff unless it's really recent. That one is really, really hard to do. At the very least, what you can do is view their answers with suspicion. Again, looking at recorded behaviour here is a really good way to get to the truth. And you can use analytics, or you can be a bit more creative. I currently work for Skyscanner, which is a travel company, and I'm really interested in the way that people plan group holidays with their friends or their family. So I can ask them to tell me how they planned the last one, and roughly how long did it take them to do this and to do that. Or I could ask them to dig out the email threads and the WhatsApp groups and the booking confirmations and all of the time-stamped evidence of the planning process. I can put that into a timeline. I can still talk to the users about the emotional experience of it. They're probably going to remember that better. But I don't have to trust their unreliable memory for the details that I can verify with other sources. And if you don't have a store of past recorded behaviour, you can start one now. I have a colleague who is also interested in how people plan travel, and he recruited a bunch of people who were just starting to think about going on trips. And he checks in with them twice a week so that he can ask them about the really, really trivial stuff before it's vanished from their memory, before it's been distorted, and then it's likely to make out. Given that I told you you can't trust people's predictions or their memories, I guess the content of this is probably going to be quite predictable. You can't trust people when they tell you about the present. Why is that? Well, it's a well-observed phenomenon that sometimes in research, a participant will tell the researcher what they think the researcher wants to hear. What's also true is sometimes the participant will tell the researcher what they themselves wish were true, or what they think should be true. So, there are some questions to which there is a right answer. Society has decided what the right thing to think or do or feel is in that circumstance. It's called social desirability bias, and it's stuff like, we all know we should exercise regularly, we all know we should eat our greens, like these inexplicably happy women are doing. Remember those people I asked about security and usability? I wonder how many of the survey respondents were telling me that they wanted things to be more secure because that's what they thought they should want. This one's known as social desirability bias. And for researchers, one of the things that's really important to know is that it can be very dependent on context. The right answer changes. Does anyone remember the spark.com? Yay! So this might only be something you encountered if you were an early teenager in the early 2000s, as I was. But we would go to the spark.com to take their purity test. Yeah, okay. So a purity test is a quiz that asks you about your more adult behaviour, and then it gives you a score from 0 to 100% about how pure or preferably how impure you were. And then you take that score and you go boast to your friends about it. If the Spark's purity test asks me how regularly I drink alcohol, the right answer is the one that makes me look glamorously impure. Once or twice a week, once or twice a day. If my doctor asks me that question, the right answer is very, very different. Context is very important here, and so avoiding social desirability bias requires a little bit of nuance exerted in your research. Sometimes the right answer is the one that society has decreed is correct, and sometimes the right answer is just the one that everyone else in the room is giving. That's commonly called part of the herd effect, but it's also known as the social default bias. Social desirability, social default. The most extreme example here is a study from the 50s done by a psychologist called Ash. In this study, small groups of participants were taken into a room, much like this one, and asked to select which two of these lines are the same length. Now, the catch was that in every small group there was only one real research participant, and everyone else was a plant. And sometimes the plants would give the right answers, and sometimes the plants would give the wrong answers, unanimously. There are 6 people in the room, here. All 6 of them are going A and B, definitely A and B. And 1/3 of the time that happened, the real research subject agreed. People are so desperate to fit in with everyone else around them that they will deny the evidence of their senses to do so. Now, in this case, I think the participants knew that they were denying the evidence of their senses. I think they knew they were giving them an incorrect answer. But the really pernicious thing about both the social desirability bias and the social default bias is people can do it without really knowing they're doing it. Or rather, they can do it without really admitting to themselves that they're doing it. Especially when it's a question of degree rather than absolutes. People shade their answers towards the thing that they think they should be doing or the thing that they wish they were doing. One of the ways in which I was taught to avoid the herd effect in research is to not do focus groups, or to not do any group-based research, but to try wherever possible to work with subjects one-on-one. Imagine my disappointment when I discovered that there are actually circumstances in which the herd effect not only affects people when they're on their own, but it affects them more when they're on their own. For this, let us talk about team. A researcher called Unha ran a study in which pairs of subjects were taken into a room and asked to choose between 2 different varieties of tea. Once again, there's a catch. Only one of them is a real research subject, and the other's a fake. In all variants of this experiment, they'd go into the room and the fake would choose their tea, and then the real subject would choose. In the first variation, immediately after choosing their tea, the fake would leave the room. In the second variation, they'd choose, then they'd wait for the real subject to make their choice, and the two of them would leave together. Now, all of the packaging of this tea was written in Korean. The participants did not read Korean. So really, they had not a great deal to go on in this choice. We'd suggest that maybe this is the kind of situation in which it's a toss-up. Maybe we expect people to go 50-50 for the 2 different teas. Certainly, the fake research subjects were divided equally between choosing option 1 and option 2. But what happened with the real research subjects was really different. In the condition where the fake subject stayed in the room while the real research subject chose, the real subject chose the same tea as the fake one 25% of the time. When the real subject was able to choose after the fake subject, after they'd left the room, they chose the same tea as them 75% of the time. Sometimes we really want to run with the herd, but we don't want to be seen to do so. So if we're in a situation where we can give the answer that everyone else gives and not get caught out in it, we're more likely to do it some of the time. Now, I keep saying that people don't necessarily know that they're lying to you. They don't know that the social desirability bias is affecting them. They don't know that the memory is fake. And that's because there's a lot of stuff that goes in our head that we aren't really aware of. And a good example of this is, often we don't know why we like the things we do. I have terrible taste in films. I think Ocean's 12 is a delightful film, but I could not explain to you where my enjoyment of the film comes from. And that's really common, actually. There's an interesting variation on this shown by research that involves jam. We've had tea people have jam, potted green many times. In the 1990s, jam experts in America, the Dearest, graded all of the strawberry jams on the American market from best to worst, 1 to 45th. And then some researchers took a subset of those jams, put them in carefully anonymous bottles, gave them to students, and asked the students to rate the jams from best to worst. And the students didn't do badly. Or rather, their preferences actually matched up with the experts' preferences fairly consistently. But then they ran another variation of the experiment, This time round, the students not only had to rank the jams, they also had to explain why. And this time it was very different. The rankings did not match up, and the jam that the experts believed to be the best was the one that got the lowest grade from the students. What's going on here? Well, when the researchers asked the students to think about why they liked the jams or disliked them, the students couldn't really explain. It comes back to system 1 and system 2 again. The jam preference is a system 1 choice. It's gut feel. It's below the level of your consciousness. And so when the students struggled to explain their real system 1 choices, their real system 1 reasons for those choices, they couldn't. And so system 2 just started looking around for something that sounded like a plausible reason why they would prefer a jam. And so maybe one jam was chunky and the other jam was smooth, and chunky jam does not sound appealing, so the chunky jam must be worse than the smooth jam. And this is surprisingly common. I think we all assume that we understand our reasons for our behaviour and the way that we feel. But a lot of the time, when we're put on the spot, we just don't. And instead of saying we don't know why, that doesn't sound very good to just not understand why you do things. So instead of admitting defeat, we just make up some reasons and change our behaviour to match the reasons. Yeah. That was the second existential crisis. People don't tell you the truth in the present. They want to give you the socially desirable answer. They want to follow the herd, even if you get them on their own. And the introspection illusion, which is what I was just talking about, means that they don't always really know why they feel the way they do. So, what do you do? Again, you're already doing some things that will help with this. Being really scrupulously neutral about how you ask questions is going to help you, as is keeping from participants what the researcher thinks the right answer is, or what everyone else has chosen. And this is often quite hard, because often at the end of research, users ask me, oh, how did I do? Did everyone else do the same thing? Did everyone else like the things I liked? Don't. And the introspection illusion. How do you deal with that? Well, it's a pretty big problem in research if every time you ask somebody for their reasons behind a decision, you can skew that decision. So the answer is just don't ask them. Or if you have to ask them after they've decided. Don't tell them they're going to have to explain their choice. Let them go for whatever they want to do whatever they want, and then ask them to explain. Now, the why answer you get won't always be true, but it can still be useful to collect. And I just recommend that when you do collect that information, you treat it as a hypothesis rather than fact. And finally, just like a research environment can switch someone over from their normal System 1 behaviour to System 2, even asking why a couple of times in research can kind of sensitise people to that and make them feel that question is always coming, whatever they do. Just emphasising while you go that you're interested in their instant responses and their gut feel can help to reduce people's tendency to do that. People can't always reliably predict their future. They can't always accurately remember the past, and they won't always tell you the truth. And the key word in all of those is always. Even in some of the studies I've been talking about, this didn't affect everybody, and it didn't affect them all the time. And this is the really tricky thing about this human irrationality, these cognitive biases. You don't know who is being affected by which biases at which time. And that makes it really, really hard to plan around. But at least now you've got a knowledge of some of the ways in which people can accidentally lie to you or accidentally behave in atypical manners in research. Now you have an idea of those. You can at least structure your research and interpret the results with those in mind, even if you cannot actually ever get your users to behave rationally.